Just give me a few minutes and maybe you'll never suffer again. Not because the world will change, but because you will change. These words, inspired by the thinking of Michel de Montaigne, have the power to turn your mind upside down and free you from the invisible prison of pain. Stay with me until the end. It will be worth every second. Part 1. The Illusion of Suffering. For many, suffering is a certainty in life, a constant presence that seems inevitable, almost like a shadow that follows us at every turn. But is suffering really something that happens to us, an external force that dominates and destroys us? Or is it actually more inside us than outside? The illusion of suffering lies precisely in this confusion. We believe that the pain and anguish we feel are direct consequences of the events around us, such as losses, failures, rejections, and tragedies. But the profound, and perhaps more liberating, truth is that suffering is not what happens to us. It is how we react to what happens to us. Imagine two people going through the same difficult situation: the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, an unexpected illness. The pain, the initial shock, may be the same for both. But what happens next? One of them sinks into feelings of despair, anger, and bitterness, allowing suffering to take over their mind and body. The other person, while not ignoring the pain, chooses to face it differently. They accept the painful fact, acknowledge the sadness, but do not allow it to define their existence or steal their hope. They learn to float, even in the midst of the storm. What changes between these two paths? Perception. Suffering, then, can be understood as a choice, even if often unconscious. It is a decision, or rather a mental habit, that we can question. Is it worth suffering beyond the physical or emotional pain we feel? Is our mind creating extra layers of suffering, as if putting a distorted filter over reality? Michel de Montaigne, one of the greatest thinkers of the Renaissance, already pointed to this fundamental distinction between pain and suffering. He saw that pain, loss, and adversity are inevitable parts of the human condition, but that unnecessary suffering, that which prolongs anguish and despair, is something we can begin to control through the exercise of reason and reflection. This realization changes everything. When we understand that suffering is not simply a reflection of what happens outside, but an internal reaction, we begin to gain power over our own experience. We cannot control external events, but we can choose how we respond to them. And that choice is the key to emotional freedom. Suffering is not an irrevocable sentence, but a possibility that we can avoid by changing our perspective. That is why the idea that, "Give me a few minutes and you will never suffer again," has such profound meaning. It is not about erasing the pain we feel, but about giving the mind time to breathe, analyze, and transform the way it views adversity. A few minutes of reflection can be enough to break the cycle of automatic suffering, to open a window of light where before there was only darkness. Thus, understanding the illusion of suffering is the first step toward living with more lightness and resilience. It is accepting that suffering does not have to be a constant, unchanging phenomenon, but rather a transitory one, shaped by our thoughts and attitudes. When we can distinguish between pain and mental suffering, we begin to build a solid foundation for facing life with serenity, even in the most difficult moments. And this is a timeless lesson, as relevant today as it was for Montaigne centuries ago. Part 2. The Power of Perspective. Michel de Montaigne, one of the most profound and influential thinkers of the Renaissance, invites us to look at suffering from a revolutionary perspective that still resonates strongly in our lives today. For Montaigne, suffering and pain are not merely external events that strike us defenseless, but experiences that gain meaning and intensity by the way we perceive and internalize them. In his writings, he shows us that true tragedy does not lie in adverse circumstances themselves, but in the way our minds react to them. Montaigne said that, "To philosophize is to learn how to die," and this phrase, although it seems gloomy at first glance, reveals a profound wisdom. To learn How to die is to learn to accept the finitude and impermanence of life and, consequently, to deal with suffering in a more serene manner. Death for him is not just physical end, but the loss of our illusion of control and invulnerability. By accepting this, we become more resilient, less slaves to fear and pain. Montaigne did not deny the existence of pain. He himself experienced moments of intense anguish and personal loss, but he emphasized that unnecessary suffering, that which prolongs anguish without purpose, is a choice. This choice is closely linked to the power of the gaze, the way we interpret what happens to us. The perspective that Montaigne proposes is a lucid one, which does not shy away from reality, but faces it with courage and honesty. It is a perspective that recognizes human imperfection and fragility without surrendering to despair. It is this perspective that transforms painful experiences into learning opportunities and adversity into opportunities for growth. By changing the way we see suffering, we can change the experience itself. This does not mean minimizing pain or pretending it does not exist, but understanding that our mind can amplify or reduce the impact that pain has on us. Montaigne teaches us that suffering is not an inevitable and immutable fate, but a phenomenon shaped by our internal perspective. Thus, the power of perspective is an invitation to pause and reflect before allowing ourselves to be consumed by pain. It is the awakening of consciousness that allows us to decide whether we will be victims of suffering or masters of our own minds. This ancient lesson is as valuable today as it was in the 16th century, for it shows us that although we cannot control everything that happens, we can always choose how to look at it. It is this power of the gaze, imbued with wisdom and acceptance, that can free us from the endless cycle of suffering and pave the way for a fuller, more conscious and serene life. Part 3. The secret lies in perspective. The secret to transforming pain into something that does not destroy us lies entirely in perspective, in the way we choose to look at our most difficult experiences. We often fall into the trap of believing that pain is an unchangeable punishment, an unbearable burden that we must carry forever. But the truth is that pain, while real, is a temporary, fleeting condition, while prolonged suffering arises from our interpretation of that pain. When we change the lens through which we see what afflicts us, we open up space for inner freedom. Instead of fighting pain, trying to ignore or deny it, we can learn to accept it, understand it, and even find a deeper meaning in it. This acceptance is not weakness, but rather a strength that allows us to break out of the vicious cycle of resistance and suffering. Montaigne, in his reflections, shows us that serenity comes from the clear awareness that we do not control everything that happens, but we can control our gaze, our reactions, and our understanding of what it means to live and suffer. When we realize that adversity is a natural part of existence, something that is beyond our will, we begin to focus not on what happens to us, but on how we react. This change in perspective gives us the power to transform pain into learning, loss into wisdom, and difficulty into personal growth. It is in this process that suffering loses its hold on us and becomes a passage, an experience that strengthens us rather than paralyzing us. Understanding that suffering is a state of mind and not an inevitable fate is liberating. It is as if, suddenly, we can step away from the emotional turmoil and observe our own lives with more distance and calm. This distance is not indifference but clarity, the clarity that we have choices and that we can choose not to be held hostage by circumstances. The secret, therefore, lies in the perspective we choose to cultivate. By changing the way we look at pain, we change our inner reality. This does not mean ignoring suffering or pretending it does not exist, but rather recognizing that it is a passing experience that can be transformed by our mental attitude. And it is precisely this transformation that can free us to live with more peace, resilience, and wisdom, even when life challenges us with its storms. In short, the secret lies in understanding that most suffering is within our minds and that by changing our perspective, we can also change our experience of life. Part 4. The choice is yours. Life presents us with inevitable challenges and pain, but one powerful truth stands out. How we respond to these challenges is entirely our choice. Montaigne reminds us that, despite external circumstances, Suffering is something we can control through conscious decisions about how we view reality. You can choose to allow pain to overwhelm you, consuming your energy and robbing you of your peace, or you can choose to look at it from a different perspective, one that liberates and empowers. This choice is not easy, and it requires courage, self-knowledge, and practice, but it is the only path to true emotional freedom. Understanding that you have this ability is the first step toward transforming your life. Instead of being a victim of circumstances, you can become the master of your mind. This transformation begins with small moments of reflection, a minute here, a few seconds there, when you decide not to let yourself be carried away by automatic suffering. The choice is yours, and with it comes the power to change the course of your story, creating a lighter, more serene and meaningful life. No matter what has happened, what really matters is how you choose to respond, and that choice is always within your reach. Life will always bring challenges, that's for sure, but the suffering we feel, that's your choice. You can let yourself be overwhelmed by pain or decide to look at it in a way that frees your mind and strengthens your spirit. That choice takes courage, but it is always within your reach. You are not a victim of circumstances. You are the master of your mind. So when pain comes, remember, the choice is yours. And that choice can transform everything.